Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, Certificate Programs, Certificate in the Teaching of English as a Second Language, CTE, Compulsory, CTE 01 The Language Learner, Block-1 The Learner, Unit-1 Who are the learners of language? -1. 1.0 Objectives. Our aim in this unit is to give you insights about the Central One role of language in human society, the role of the learner's environment in the learning process, the role of different contexts and settings for human learning, the learner's own role in the learning process. 1.1 Introduction. This unit is the first one in a block which deals almost entirely with learners of language. The course as a whole is concerned with the learning and teaching of languages, with special reference to English. Before we enter into a serious discussion of the teaching of languages, we need to try and understand some things about learners, their capabilities and motives and expectations. When we think of education and instruction and especially of designing syllabuses and training teachers, we have an image of learners, especially children, in our minds. This image tends to present them as passive receivers of whatever we provide as inputs through LRSSO and courses. Psychologists have conducted hundreds of experiments, using both humans and animals as subjects, and have discovered or formulated various general laws of learning. Curriculum specialists have tried to apply these laws or principles to design an effective curriculum, one that is likely to be successful and efficient. The most important consideration in the success of a curriculum is of course whether the EFI, or pupils, have learnt one or most of whatever they were supposed to learn. As we will see later in this unit, a great deal of learning takes place even without any planned and deliberate teaching. This learning includes not only purely physical activity like walking or swimming or riding a bicycle, but also matters which involve the mind. The learning of the first language without much obvious evidence of teaching by nearly every young child in every human community is perhaps the best example of this. The knowledge that societies have accumulated and which various adults, specialists, have mastered needs to be passed on to the young. Children are born with this knowledge. Most of it has to be passed on through the process of education in which this knowledge is packaged in the form of school subjects. And most school subjects have to be taught by teachers in the formal school, at least to begin with, and usually for many years. Language, especially the mother tongue, is a striking exception to this general rule. As already mentioned, children learn to speak their mother tongue, at least, long before they enter formal school. Also, many persons who have dropped out of school, and even those who have never been to school at all, are quite fluent users of the language, sometimes languages, of their particular communities. Of course, such people may not be able to read and write, i.e., handle the written form of the language, but they have mastered lots of complex grammar, an extended vocabulary, important aspects of the organization, and even style of the language they speak. The principle that emerges from these facts is that learning of the languages commonly spoken in the community in which individuals live is a much wider process than what is prescribed and taught in school or college. Since there is no clearly identifiable agency outside the school that is doing any teaching of language, we must conclude that human learners of language have some special capacity to learn the language. Beginning with this first unit, we will try to understand something about this powerful capacity to learn one language that seems to be a part of human nature. We will focus on learners of language, their abilities, their styles of learning, their sources of motivation, etc. We should be able to use these ideas in the language syllabus design and language teaching methodology we want to formulate. Language instruction can be made highly effective if we are able to tap the rich resource represented by the human learner's tremendous capacity to learn his language and build on it. This first unit has the question "Who are learners of language?" as its title. We are not interested here in factual information of the type that goes into individual biodata sheets or survey reports, boys, girls, urban, rural, English medium, regional language medium, monolingual, bilingual and so on. Such characteristics are of course important, especially when we are planning instruction for particular target groups. Here we are more interested in the capabilities and resources that language learners in general have. We shall begin by reviewing the role of language in human affairs and going on to look at the learning resources that members of human society have. Check your progress. 1. Human learners have a special capacity to learn languages. Give at least 2 reasons to support this claim. 1.2 The central role of language in human society. The use of language as the primary means of communication is one of the defining characteristics of the human species. Many animal species also use signs of various types to communicate or convey information. See Unit 5 of this course. But these sign systems are very simple and inflexible. They are very far removed from the complexity and versatility and creativity that goes with human or natural language. The primary position of language, especially speech, in the life of mankind is highlighted by the expression, talking animal, which is sometimes used to describe humans. This central role of communication through natural language in human social life is made possible by the fact that all human individuals are able to handle or operate the language, or languages, of their societies. This is so obvious that we simply take it for granted. But it is useful to note that there is an important principle here. Nearly everyone in any society is a competent and effective language user. This applies to all normal human beings. Only that tiny proportion of the population of any country with major physiological handicaps, brain damage, mental retardation, deafness and dumbness, remain unable to use language. The learning of the mother tongue or first language, L1, is a slow and long drawn-out process. It is difficult to say when a person has fully mastered his, her L1 and so has finished learning it. Further, many people learn more than one language. This is especially true of multilingual societies like ours, and with modern communication breaking down national, linguistic boundaries, learning foreign languages is also becoming increasingly common. These additional languages too are learned slowly, even if there is a crash course, and like the L1, complete mastery is never attained. Thus it is possible to say that for practical purposes, everyone is a language learner. 1.3 Socialization, the learning of language and culture. The growth and development of the human child into an adolescent and later an adult involves 2 parallel and interlinked processes. Only is physiological growth or maturation. This is supported mainly by nutrition and exercise, the ingredients of good health, and protection from physical harm. The second and more complex process is the psychological growth of the individual. This is an important aspect of social development. The process whereby the helpless infant gradually becomes an independent and actively participating member of his, her community. A functioning member of human society is an individual who is able to interact and communicate effectively with others, both directly with individuals and more indirectly with the community in general. This is made possible by the use of language. Thus, one major requirement that must be met as the child grows is the learning of the L1. A member of society is also a person, an individual with a unique combination of characteristics that make up his, her personality. Among these characteristics are personality traits, interests, abilities and talents. Remember that we often refer to a small baby as it, even when we know whether it is a boy or a girl. This is because we have not yet begun to see this child as a person. The long and slow process of psychological and social development of the child is called socialization. Man is often described as a social animal. One very obvious reason for this is that human beings usually live together in families and wider communities. But this is not always true. Remember here that in the folklore of most communities, there are important characters who are wanderers and hermits and outcasts. These are individuals who do not have any link with or claim to belong to a particular community. And we find such people in modern societies too. The more important and interesting aspect of man's social nature is related to how it is formed. An individual's personality and behavior patterns are determined to a large extent by the culture in which his, her early socialization took place. The human infant is born with the potential for developing in a vast number of different ways. The culture into which he is born functions as an environment which provides the opportunity and support for learning various things associated with being a person and member of society. At the same time, it restricts what is learned by the child. Thus, the language the child is exposed to in the home and neighborhood becomes the L1, and the culture of that particular community is what the child learns and accepts as his, her own. Thus, the language and culture of the community in which socialization takes place influences the social nature and identity of the individual in important ways. A child has very little choice in these matters. It is only after we have become socialized and learned how to live in society, how to operate the system, in other words, that we can begin to rebel or become reformers. A remarkable feature of the process of learning the L1 is that it occurs quite naturally and is managed with a high level of effectiveness. This strikes us as truly amazing when we note that this learning of language takes place without any conscious planning and effort going into teaching it. Various persons around the child, both adults and other children, help and support this L1 acquisition process, but there is no systematic teaching. We can state another principle now. Every child learns to speak his, her L1 quite effectively, even without planned and organized teaching. Of course, after the child goes to school, a great deal more learning takes place under instruction, especially reading and writing. But this curriculum-based teaching is based on what was learned earlier through the natural process of socialization. We should also remember here that not everyone goes to school, and of those who do start, quite a few do not stay there more than a few years. Even so, such persons with little or no schooling are quite effective users of the spoken form of their L1. It is worth noting here that in many societies, and this is especially true of all parts of India, children grow up in communities where more than one language is commonly spoken. 1.4 Different contexts and settings for human learning. The total process of socialization as mentioned above is very long, drawn out and slow, and it covers a complex and comprehensive set of activities. Through these activities, the culture of the society, customs, values, attitudes, languages, folklore, knowledge and skills, technology, etc., is passed on to each new generation. These ongoing and naturally occurring activities form the most common context for human learning. Children are involved in these activities, but many of them are not specially designed for children. Young children and teenagers and adults all take part. These largely informal social activities can be contrasted with the more planned and organized operations associated with schooling or formal education. Schooling, especially because it is spread out over many years, is of course a part of the broader process of socialization. The overall purpose and effect of both are virtually the same. But the organized and consciously implemented activities of schooling can be placed in a separate category because of certain special characteristics they have. One obvious feature of schooling is that a few specially designated persons function as teachers and children, learners, go to specially set up places called the classroom where teaching learning is expected to take place. In the context of school, children have a special opportunity and responsibility to learn. They are expected to pay attention and be serious and try hard and so on. This school-related image of the child is indicated by the term pupil. This is a useful label, and we shall use it here to distinguish between two roles that children usually have. They are always learners, in general, because they are involved in the processes of socialization. Sometimes they are also pupils, who are learning from teachers in class. A second important aspect of schooling is that only some specific types of knowledge and skill, selected from the total cultural heritage of the society, are covered in the program of instruction followed there. These selected areas constitute the curriculum. Certain other types of activity are treated as extracurricular. As we all know, quite often these are things that children find more meaningful and interesting than what is in the curriculum or portions to be covered. The formality of schooling requires that what is in the syllabus, timetable has to be done on a given day, not what seems more interesting and enjoyable for the pupils. And then there are many things which are always treated as outside the concerns of the school. Learning in these areas is taken care of by the agencies of socialization, or special school-like institutions. Schools and colleges, especially their classroom and laboratories, represent a very highly structured formal context for learning. There are other contexts where the degree of organization and formality is lower. We find these in the extracurricular activities of school and in similar activities related to the home and neighborhood. Some examples are sports and games, cultural programs, guides and scouts activities, excursions, visits to museums and exhibitions. These activities are seen as broadly educative. There is the hope that children will benefit, learn, in various ways. But there is not a deliberate plan to teach and test, following a syllabus, as in the classroom setting. Further, these activities are not compulsory. Children's interests are taken into account. There is a third type of context we are all familiar with, where there is conscious effort to learn and something we would call instruction is taking place, but the arrangements are highly informal. A family friend, not a professional, functioning as a music teacher or sports coach or driving instructor would come under this category. What is significant is that someone with more skill or knowledge is trying consciously to help and guide a learner with less ability initially to gain more of it, with the cooperation of this learner. An older child trying to teach a younger one how to fly a kite, or ride a bicycle or to play cards would be good examples of this type of highly informal but purposeful and effortful setting for learning. The individual practicing something, cycling, singing, reciting, or doing homework or revising for a test, is also learning in this informal but planned and serious manner. We have briefly looked at the variety of contexts and settings in which learning takes place. What is of interest is that learning seems to occur quite successfully in all of them. We have another principle to record now. Human learning takes place in a wide variety of ways. There does not seem to be any basis for saying there is a best context and method or even that some are better than others. Making fine distinctions between schooling and socialization, or between formal and informal settings is not of any importance in itself. These categories were used as a means of clarifying some ideas in the discussion above. In fact, as our experience tells us, any real or natural learning situation will have some formal and some informal aspects. We need not worry about placing them neatly into one category or the other. Check your progress for 1. Human learning takes place in a wide variety of ways. Discuss 3 contexts in which children formally learn certain skills. 2. What is the difference between a learner and a pupil? 1.5 The versatility of the human learner. The crucial role of learning in development. One of the points that came up in our earlier discussion was that the child is born with potential. The environment representing opportunity to learn plays an important role in determining how this potential is fulfilled. The best example of this is how the linguistic environment of the child determines which one, among the hundreds and thousands of languages this or any child could learn, comes to play the role of the L1. It is possible to respond to this pessimistically by saying that we are victims of fate, and that there is no real human freedom. But surely the more interesting and exciting principle we find here is that human nature is highly plastic and adaptable, and not predetermined as is in the case with animals. Most animal behavior is instinctive or biologically predetermined. All members of a species will show the same patterns of behavior if development has been normal. For human beings, on the other hand, variability and individual differences in psychological and social behavior are the norms. We are born with potential which develops in widely differing ways for each of us. It is only at the physical or physiological level that behavior patterns are essentially alike. Nearly all that goes into our human nature, ideas, beliefs, attitudes, likes and dislikes, hopes, fears, mental and physical abilities, and so on, is the result of learning in interaction with the environment. A very important point here is that the environment that helps to shape the nature of the person is not fixed. Both the physical and the social environment of an individual can and does change. A young child's family can move from one linguistic community to another, or from living as a small single-child family into a large joint family setup, or from a small village to a large impersonal urban center. The possibilities are virtually infinite and many actual changes do keep occurring. The young child especially has to be able to adjust, which means learn, to new physical and social surroundings. Thus the important principle relating to the environment and learning is that humans have a tremendous capacity to learn and keep learning. This versatility and flexibility is crucial for our survival in drastically changing environments. If we relied largely on fixed and instinctive behavior patterns, we would be unable to cope with new surroundings by changing our behavior. This is why the plasticity of human nature is so important. It is the essential foundation on which the diversity and richness of what we call human civilization has developed. The capacity to learn mentioned above is also very effectively applied or utilized by nearly all human beings of all ages. We are not only talking here of a vague hope like, a large country like India has the potential to win 20 gold medals at the Olympics. As we look at language teaching more closely in later units of the course, we will find many references to the problems and difficulties that learners have, and the challenges these pose for teachers and curriculum developers. It might be useful then to recall this powerful idea. Learning is going on all the time and in various ways, and for most learners it is quite successful. 1.6 The learner's role in learning. Personal but not fixed characteristics. Two very general principles which emerge from the earlier discussion are that human learning is very effective and that learning is based on interaction with the environment. This might lead us to think that learning is entirely managed or controlled from the outside, or, in other words, that nearly anything can be taught to human beings by providing the necessary teaching inputs. These inputs are the models for imitation, the illustrations and demonstrations, the explanations, etc. that the typical teacher provides to a class of pupils. But such a view of learning, controlled from the outside, would be quite inaccurate. Learning is not simply a matter of absorbing what is made available as inputs, like a sponge soaking up water. The learner is a key factor in determining what is learned, how it is learned and how fast. There are various principles or laws which have been found to apply to the processes of learning. Some of these will be discussed more fully in Course 3. Here we shall just note that various characteristics of the learner will influence what and how he or she learns in a given learning situation or when faced with a set of inputs. Every teacher finds out very soon that this is true. When something is taught or presented to a class, all the pupils do not take it in, or learn it in the same way or to the same extent. The nature of the individual pupil seems to be an important factor. Another general fact about learning, that teachers know only too well, is that what is learned is not quite the same as what is taught. Thus, learning is strongly influenced by the unique individual characteristics of the learner. This applies both to informal learning and to formal learning. The implications of this learner factor is that we cannot understand the process of learning without a fairly adequate picture of the individual learner. In other words, we cannot hope to make planned instruction very effective if we do not match it with the pupil's capacity to cope with the new item of learning and her receptivity to it. We shall use the term readiness for specific new learning here to denote this combination of ability and attitude that the learner brings to each new learning situation. Judging the readiness of pupils with sensitivity and tailoring instruction to fit well with it constitutes the central challenge in syllabus construction and in teaching. A very important feature of this learner factor is that it is based on the very large store or reserve of learned abilities and attitudes and interests that every learner has. We are not dealing here with the general and stable characteristics of individuals that we are more familiar with, such as body build, general health and mental ability, intelligence. These characteristics do affect learning, but only in a general and predictable way. Our concern here is not these features, but knowledge, abilities and attitudes and interests that have developed and continue to be developed as a result of exposure to the environment and the learning this generates. The large and constantly expanding store of such items represent a learner's special resources, or readiness, for new learning in particular areas. Sometimes, when a new topic is the focus of learning, there might be in the learner's background store, a small cluster of specific items of knowledge and skill, and high interest, which can be of help and provide a boost to learning in this particular area. For example, a child who is exposed to the tools and procedures of carpentry in the home or neighborhood might pick up some highly specific knowledge about sizes and shapes and also develop an interest in this broad area. Sometime later, when certain topics in geometry are being taken up in class, this child will be a good learner even if he is generally weak in subjects like algebra and physics. Here we can say the child's specific readiness for the topics in geometry have acted as a special advantage and given the learning process a boost. It is easy to see that this can happen in relation to a wide range of areas in which there is a learning requirement. Thus we can think in terms of a large variety of possible specific readiness. The store or reservoir of abilities and attitudes which is the basis of readiness is built up slowly and steadily as exposure to the environment leads to learning. Its size and richness is not linked to general characteristics like intelligence in any important way. In fact, the resource represented by readiness can help a learner be quite successful in learning at least in some areas, even when her general progress at studies is not very good. A word of caution is necessary here. The learner's past experiences, which make up the store we have talked about, will not necessarily be an advantage in every case. Sometimes there may be nothing that is of any special help to make a given item easier to learn. Sometimes, the individual's background might even be a disadvantage. This happens when an individual lacks some specific item of knowledge or skill which individuals of that age or in that class are assumed to have. Clearly, this is a matter of chance to a large extent, as it is the exposure or opportunity to learn that is the cause of the deficiency. If an individual does not know something many others happen to know, this cannot be treated as a reliable indication of her being unintelligent or a poor learner. There is a second way in which the learner's background store can have a negative influence. This is through the development of a negative attitude, for example, a lack of interest towards certain activities or topics as a result of unhappy earlier experiences. Many of us would know of cases where an individual's interest in something has been killed by an uninspiring or insensitive teacher, perhaps even a harsh and new one. The general principle here too is that the individual's personal pattern of learned knowledge and attitudes can affect future learning. On the whole, however, we can say that the variety of specific elements that go into the store of resources of each individual is more helpful and advantageous than harmful, as a factor in the learning process. To sum up, the lemma factor we have discussed above is a highly flexible and changing one. It is personal, but it is only marginally related to stable qualities like intelligence and personality type. These qualities appear to be strongly influenced by heredity, and so are considered to be relatively unchanging. What matters most as far as effect on learning is concerned is the wide, and ever-increasing, range of items, abilities and attitudes that have been learned. This influence of past learning on new learning is a principle that helps us to understand why human learners are so versatile. In many new and challenging situations, the learning of each individual is supported by the store of resources built up in the past, not only by the inputs provided. An important consequence of this is that an individual's learning pattern is highly personalized, but it is also dynamic as the resources for learning are constantly developing. This is something we need to remember while planning a curriculum. 1.7 Let us sum up. In this first unit we have noted the great capacity for learning that human beings have. Most human behavior, especially social and cultural behavior, is the result of learning. It is not instinctive and thus predetermined. The learning of language, a seemingly never-ending activity, is the best example of the tremendous versatility and vitality of the human learning processes. We have also seen that learning is a highly individualized process. Each person's unique learning history has a strong influence on what and how he learns from a given situation. The notion of readiness for new learning in a specific area is relevant here. A critical feature of readiness in this sense is that it is the result of learning and so is constantly changing and developing. This tends to reinforce the differences between individuals, in the same class for instance. An even more important consequence of changing readiness is that the same person may function differently, as a learner, in different situations and as time passes. A pupil's status as a good or poor learner is therefore not fixed and generally applicable. For each new occasion for learning, the individual starts with a fresh combination of knowledge, skill and attitude that can make the levels of involvement and success quite different from those of other occasions. This point carries a very important lesson for us. We should not prejudge a pupil's learning capacity on the basis of her past record, or what is more common, reputation. A pupil who has been weak in some subject area need not remain that way always. As new topics are taken up, the value of that pupil's readiness might change significantly and there could be a spurt of successful learning. The opposite might also happen sometimes. As we shall see through various units of this course, the learning of language involves a wide variety of tasks and cognitive operations. This variety is much greater for language than for the typical subjects of the school and college curriculum. In designing and implementing a syllabus for teaching a language, English, which is one of the main topics of this course, the professional aim is always to adjust teaching inputs to the needs, or readiness, of the learners. We have seen here how difficult it is to pin down learners and arrive at a definite and stable description of their learning ability. There are learning-related differences across individuals and within the same individual. This might seem to be bad news as far as effective syllabus design goes. However, the main point emerging out of this unit is that the capacity to learn languages that human beings of all ages have is something truly remarkable, and this is put to good use even when there is no teaching to support it. What we need to do is make the situations of syllabus and teaching-based learning more like the varied natural language learning situations which we know of. We have not come to any definite answers to our who questions. But we have a sense of the capabilities of learners of language in general, even while recognizing their individuality. In the second unit which follows, we shall look at some of the common features that are shared by members of various groups of learners. The differences across these types will be an important consideration in planning instruction. Planners must keep asking, which type or types of learners are being targeted by the syllabus being developed?